the German advance south of Lake Ilmen. 1 week before the advance to Novgorod, the German 10th Infantry Corps advanced to the south of Lake Ilmen with the objective of capturing the city of Staraya Russa. From the history of the 126th Infantry Division, I quote, "On the 4th of August, the attack along the Shimsk-Staraya Russa road continued. It immediately gained ground. At 0900 hours, Nagova, 10 kilometers northwest of Staraya Russa, fell, and shortly afterwards, a Russian counterattack with heavy tanks was repelled. Our further attacks met stubborn enemy Soviet resistance supported by artillery and planes. Soviet resistance at Nagova decreased in the evening only after a skillful attack in Bakochina by the 46th Infantry Regiment of the 30th Infantry Division." End of quote. The next day, the Germans advanced and scouted the western outskirts of Staraya Russa and found out that Soviet resistance had stiffened. In their own words, I quote, "The attack began at 0900 hours on the 6th of August. It was carried out across mainly open ground against an enemy who was still fighting hard and who had a definite artillery and aerial superiority. Nevertheless, the 426th Infantry Regiment under Major Bunzel was able to thrust deep into the enemy position and push into the west portion of Staraya Russa. The battalion was at the river Polist by the afternoon. The enemy was completely surprised." End of quote. The 126th Infantry Division did not wait for artillery support to arrive, and since the weather had improved, it called on the Luftwaffe. The morning of the 7th of August, an immediate preparation was provided for an aerial attack from the 8th Flieger Corps led by General von Richthofen against the still undamaged positions of Staraya Russa, with which its many towers and churches still presented a picture of old Russia, and turned it into rubble and ash. The 426th Infantry Regiment crossed the river Palist on the tree trunks laying in the river and was able to push to the west edge of the city without any serious enemy resistance. During this time, the 422nd Infantry Regiment, supported by the 426th Infantry Regiment, cleared the areas not yet surrendered by the enemy in the northwest and north areas of the city. The continued attack to the east was to be carried out in a concerted manner by all three divisions of the 10th Infantry Corps. End of quote. The next day, the Soviets counterattacked with strong artillery support and managed to enter the southern part of the city and occupy the Staraya Russa Spa and gardens. Furious urban close combat raged all throughout the rest of the day and the whole night among the burning houses without a clear victor. But luck smiled on the Germans in the morning as they prepared their attack. The Soviets were also preparing their attack and were caught in the jump-off positions by a heavy German artillery barrage scheduled for exactly the same time. By the evening, the Germans had captured the city and were on the hills 4 kilometers to the east. The 126th Infantry Division and the 30th Infantry Division advanced to the river Lovat. The 290th Infantry Division turned to the south in order to provide flank protection. Between here and the 2nd Army Corps, which was still near Holm, there was a huge gap with absolutely no German troops. The reason for this gap was that Army Group North thought that the fighting south of Lake Ilmen was over when, on the 27th of July, Field Marshal von Leeb wrote on his diary, "The enemy in front of the 16th Army front is defeated. The remnants are leaving the swamp area south of Lake Ilmen to the east." End of quote. On the whole, the 16th Army occupied a front of 140 kilometers or 87 miles with 5 divisions and 2/3 of another, which gives us an operational density of about 25 kilometers or 15.5 miles of front per division. Such sparse formations favored the success of the Soviet counter-offensive. The Red Army had noticed this gap, and Lieutenant General Nikolai Vatutin and Major General Matvey Zakharov of the General Staff of the Northwestern Front devised a plan to attack the German forces around Lake Ilmen. The plan was considered extremely optimistic and ambitious by the Stavka, and this was reflected in the State Directive number 824 to the commander of the Northwestern Front troops, dated 9th of August of 1941. These are some of the considerations in that directive, and I quote: "The plan of operation presented by the commander of the Northwestern Front is currently unrealistic. It is necessary to reckon with the forces that are available, and therefore it is necessary to set a limited task to defeat the enemy forces grouped in the area of Soltsi, Staraya Russa under the No train station, and gain a foothold just there. To carry out this operation, use the 34th, 48th and 11th Armies. The 27th Army, reinforced by the 256th Rifle Division and the 54th Rifle Division, must capture the home area." End of quote. Marshal Boris Mikhailovich Shaposhnikov, who signed this directive, considered the planned rate of advance of 15 kilometers or just under 10 miles per day to be too optimistic. He ordered the following: "During the offensive, do not rush forward. Have a daily rate of advance of 4 to 5 kilometers, paying attention to reconnaissance and securing your flanks and rear, and securing the space you have already passed." End of quote. The main strike force was the 34th Army with 5 rifle divisions: the 245th, the 254th, 257th, 259th, and the 262nd. 3 of them, the 254th, 257th, and 262nd, were formed in the Moscow military district by order of the infamous Lavrenti Beria from the personnel of the NKVD. 1,000 ordinary and junior commanding officers and 500 commanding officers from Beria's department, mainly from the border guards, were allocated for each division. The rest were called up from the reserve. The Germans detected Soviet troop movement in Staraya Russa, as Generaloberst Franz Halder notes in his diary of the 1st of August, and I quote: "Results of aerial reconnaissance: heavy loading of the railway near Staraya Russa. Apparently, this is due to the transfer of 3 divisions in the area of Lake Ilmen, about which the Russian prisoner of war, the chief of staff of the division, already testified." End of quote. Nevertheless, the Germans did not make any specific preparations, as they were currently busy with their own offensive operations. The Soviet offensive was ordered to begin on the 12th of August, but by this time the situation had changed dramatically. Part of the plan was thwarted by the German offensive, so Lieutenant General Stepan Dmitrovich Akimov's 48th Army in the Novgorod area could not participate, as it was defending itself against the German attack. To the south, the 27th Army's advance was halted in the city of Holm, but the 34th Army made good progress and advanced up to 40 kilometers, or roughly 25 miles, reaching the Staraya Russa-Dno railway on the 14th of August. The Soviet 11th Army was already fighting the German 10th Army Corps in Staraya Russa. The German 126th and 30th Infantry Divisions stopped their offensive and redeployed west of Staraya Russa. This allowed the Soviet units of the 11th Army that had retreated east of Staraya Russa to switch back to the attack, as the German 10th Army Corps was practically surrounded. The same day, von Leeb recognized the danger to his southern flank and sent von Manstein with the SS Totenkov Motorized Division and the 3rd Motorized Division to neutralize the Soviet advance. It had truly been a surprise for the Germans. Oberst Walter Charles de Beaulieu, Chief of Staff of the 4th Panzergruppe under Höppner, wrote after the war, I quote: "When Field Marshal von Leeb visited the command post of the Panzer Group early on the morning of the 15th of August, Generaloberst Höppner told him of his intention to detach the 3rd Motorized Infantry Division from the 56th Panzer Corps so that it could be sent to help maximize the progress being made by the 41st Panzer Corps. The Field Marshal agreed to this, But, as had been the case with the SS Totenkopf division, he rejected the request of the Generaloberst for support from the 8th Fliegerkorps. He still had in mind the idea of the point of main effort on the right. On top of that, his thinking was probably influenced by the development of the situation in the vicinity of Staraya Russa, even if only subconsciously. The Panzer Group now began to feel the effects of this, although not yet at a level that could be regarded as critical. Towards 1800 hours, the Army Group ordered the Panzer Group to hand over the 56th Panzer Corps, with the 3rd Motorized Infantry Division to the 16th Army. This news struck the headquarters of the Panzer Group, which was situated near the peaceful Lake Samro, like a bombshell. The situation near Staraya Russa must have been fairly bad. To abandon the advance on Leningrad, an objective for which we had striven so hard since the beginning, due to what could only be a diversionary attack, could result in the initiative being taken by the enemy. The Russian leadership would be able to congratulate itself for such a result. End of quote. Von Manstein, on his part, writes about this in his memoirs. Our corps was given a new task. At long last, it was to join up with the 41st Panzer Corps in the north for the assault on Leningrad. On the 15th of August, we began moving north. The route to our new command post on Lake Samro, 25 miles or 40 kilometers southwest of Narva, was so bad that we took 8 hours to travel a distance of 125 miles or 201 kilometers. We had hardly reached Lake Samro late that evening when a telephone call was received from Panzer Group headquarters ordering us to halt the 3rd Motorized Division, which was behind us, and to drive straight down south again next morning to report to the headquarters of the 16th Army in the north. We, together with the 3rd Motorized Division and the SS Totenkopf Division, which was being pulled over from Lake Ilmen, were now to join the 16th Army. No one will pretend that we were particularly pleased at these peregrinations. So on the 16th of August, we moved back to the north along the same dreadful route that we had covered the day before. This time, the distance was 160 miles or 258 kilometers, and we took 13 hours to do it. Luckily, the 3rd Motorized had not come too far north and could be turned around in good time. But what the troops thought of this all, I could not care to imagine. End of quote. Von Manstein continues by saying that the Army Group forces were inadequate for the whole area and that the terrain was completely unsuitable for tanks. When he arrived in the 16th Army headquarters, he found that the 10th Army Corps was defending itself from the east and south against the far superior forces of the Soviet 11th and 34th Armies. The main threat came from the south, with the risk of outflanking the 10th Army Corps. The 18th of August, General Halder wrote in his diary, I quote, 1800 hours, von Leeb calls up. Very gloomy picture of the situation of the 10th Corps. The last man has been thrown into the fighting, and the troops are exhausted. The enemy keeps on pushing north to Staraya Russa. Only the engineers are left for commitment. The commanders of the 10th Army Corps and Army Group North think that they are lucky if the front holds for another day. They expect relief from a counterattack by von Manstein with the SS Totenkopf and the 3rd Motorized Divisions. They will get ready for an attack tonight. Von Manstein, in his memoirs, describes his task. What our corps had to do, if possible without attracting the attention of the enemy, was to introduce its 2 motorized divisions into his western flank, east of the No, in order to roll up the front while he was busy attacking our own 10th Corps in the north. The task ahead was a pretty one, and it was gratifying to see how pleased the SS were to come back under our command. It was only a pity that we could not get the 8th Panzer Division released for such a worthwhile operation. Von Manstein managed to move his 2 motorized divisions covertly to the western flank of the Soviet 34th Army, and he attacked on the 19th of August. When we unleashed the attack early the next day, the enemy was obviously taken completely by surprise. Our plan to roll up the enemy front from the flank proved entirely successful, and in engagements that followed, we and the 10th Corps, which had now returned to the attack, jointly succeeded in roundly defeating the 38th Soviet Army. Now here, von Manstein is of course wrong because it was the 34th Army, not the 38th. By the 22nd of August, we had reached the Lovat River southeast of Staraya Russa, despite the fact that in that sandy terrain, with its almost complete absence of roads, the infantry of the two motorized divisions had to advance most of the way on foot. During those few days, the 56th Panzer Corps alone captured 12,000 prisoners, 141 tanks, 246 guns, and several hundred automatic weapons and motor vehicles. The booty included two extremely interesting items. One was a brand new 8.8 cm anti-aircraft battery gun of German manufacture from the year 1941, and the other was the very first Soviet salvo gun to fall into German hands. As I was most anxious to have the latter evacuated, I was all the more angry to find that it could not be moved because somebody had helped himself to the tires. The offender proved to be none other than my second assistant, Major Niemann, who had discovered that these tires fitted our own command wagon. He looked somewhat crestfallen or sad when told to hand them back for reassembly. End of quote. Von Manstein is talking, of course, of the Katyusha rocket launchers, the first to be captured by the Germans on the Eastern Front. According to David Glantz, von Manstein's attack yielded 18,000 Russian prisoners and the capture or destruction of over 200 tanks, 300 guns and mortars, 36 anti-aircraft guns and 700 other vehicles. 3 days later, the 25th of August, both Soviet armies, the 11th and the 34th, were pushed back over the Lovat River and the Soviet Staraya Russa offensive had failed. The three armies of the Soviet Northwestern Front suffered heavy losses. The 10th of August, the 11th, 27th and 34th armies had a total of 327,099 men, and on September the 1st, their total number had fallen to 198,549 men. So, casualties constituted 39% of the initial strength of 128,550 men. But it was especially bad for the 34th Army that faced von Manstein. The 10th of August, it had 54,912 men, and on the 26th of August, its strength was only 22,043 men, a staggering 60% casualty ratio. The loss in heavy equipment was even worse. Out of 83 tanks, 74 were lost or captured, that's an 89%, and out of 748 guns and mortars, 628 were lost or captured, that's a 48% loss ratio. Leeb was an army commissar of the first rank, the equivalent of a lieutenant general in 1941 in the Red Army. But more importantly, he was a direct representative of the Stavka, and wherever he went, Red Army generals and soldiers knew they were talking to almost Comrade Stalin himself. Commissar Mechlis was not popular. He was nicknamed the Shark and the Gloomy Demon during the Great Purge of 1937, when he supervised the purge of 30,000 political commissars, removing 20,000 of them. He was arbitrary, cruel, and sadistic, and enjoyed the very rare gift of Stalin's favor. This was the man sent by the Stavka to find scapegoats for the Red Army's failures in the Northwestern Front. The first thing he did was to remove the Northwestern Front's commander, Major General Pyotr Sobenikov, and have him demoted and sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. He also had Major General of Artillery Vasily Safronovich Goncharov shot in front of the line of staff workers of the 34th Army on September the 11th of 1941 without a written sentence, something he did the day after the execution, the one that sentenced him to death, and said, "For the cowardice shown and personal withdrawal from the battlefield to the rear, for violation of military discipline, expressed in the direct failure to comply with the order of the front to come to the aid of units advancing from the west, for not taking measures to save the material part of the artillery, for the loss of military appearance and 2 days of drunkenness during the fighting of the army, Major General of Artillery Vasily Safronovich Goncharov on the basis of the order of the headquarters of the Supreme High Command, number 57. End of quote. Of course, Goncharov was rehabilitated posthumously in 2002. The commander of the 34th Army, Major General Kuzma Maximovich Kachanov, was found guilty of failing to comply with the order of the Military Council of the Front to strike the army formations on the flank and rear of the advancing enemy, destroy him, and reach the set objectives. The indictment says that allegedly Kachanov, contrary to the mentioned order, removed 3 divisions from the defensive line, which allowed the enemy to break through the defenses of the army. The verdict noted that, and I quote, "their withdrawal was made in disorder, command and control of the troops was lost, as a result of which the front was open to the enemy and given the opportunity to occupy part of our territory." The tribunal dismissed any reasonable arguments made by Kachanov in his defense, and he was sentenced to death, of course, and shot on the 29th of September of 1941. He was also rehabilitated posthumously in 1958 after Comrade Stalin's death. According to many authors, including David Glantz, the reasons for the failure of the Soviet attack at Staraya Russa were the following. The 16th Army preempted and disrupted the 48th Army attack by advancing on Novgorod on the 10th of August. The German 10th Army Corps attacked eastwards from Staraya Russa, tying down much of the 11th Army's forces. The terrain was roadless and favored the defender, and made it very difficult for the attacker to advance and keep up with logistics. The Red Army still had major command and control issues at this stage of the war. But it was not all bad for the Red Army. The Staraya Russa offensive prompted the German High Command to transfer forces from Army Group Center to the north. It also kept Army Group North's small mobile forces dispersed, preventing the concentration of force and greatly delaying the German advance on Leningrad. At the end of this battle, the accumulated losses of Army Group North stood at a massive 80,000 men. A large number, but still far from the appalling Soviet losses. If you'd like to see more about this day-to-day account of the war on the Eastern Front, comment, like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching.